Well, this one got out of hand. Scott Jennings thought this was a normal day at CNN, but the conversation quickly escalated when Jeff Jarvis literally called online and alternative media a freak show that wasn't challenging the Trump administration enough, but it signals a desperation in the old dying legacy media that's starting to grow. So take a look at this exchange and you'll see what's going on.
The bigger question is that mass media are dying. I hate to say this in the middle of mass media.
I mean, we all know that.
But mass media are dying. And so if you try to think that we're going to please everybody, those days are over. You've got to stand on some principle. You've got to stand for something. You've got to be somewhere in the spectrum. And if you think you're just going to make nice to everybody, the problem is that the right wing, hello, Scott, has taken advantage of this situation, I think, quite cleverly, quite wisely. They've played into a weakness.
What situation?
The situation of media being under attack. And so they've created a situation where...
You've almost got it. Keep going. What the right wing is taking advantage of is finally the American people saying enough is enough. They're tired of feeling like the mass media screens out one viewpoint versus another in political coverage. They're tired of media institutions favoring one party over another. They're tired of narratives over factual stories. If I had any advice for 60 Minutes or anybody else, it would be just cover the news and try to be fair about it and stop putting your finger on the scale, especially during campaigns.
You know what I find hilarious? Jeff Jarvis is trying to make that point literally in the same week that the chief producer for 60 Minutes, Bill Owens, resigned, claiming that the show's editorial independence was compromised, which honestly we even saw with their deceptively edited Kamala Harris interview that Donald Trump sued them for. So the implication that it was just a spontaneous phenomenon that one end of the political spectrum has created a whole new world of online media while the other side has failed is just false. By the way, we expose these media tricks like no one else will, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to become part of the conversation. Now, the truth is the last decade has shown a broad segment of the right and center right that the corporate media is anything but fair and unbiased, especially since the rise of Donald Trump. And that's what concluded with the election being dubbed the podcast election when the influence and sway of the MSM was finally over. And to say otherwise, like Jeff does here, is just gaslighting to those people further.
You're talking about the old mass media myth that you could have this thing that was in the middle. The Walter Cronkite saying, that's the way it is, when it wasn't for many Americans the way it was. When people were pissed off.
People back in those days trusted the media, didn't they?
No, they just couldn't be heard. Because there was no two-way. Now we have the internet.
Look at the Gallup polling. It was here, and now it's here. It's fallen off of a cliff.
Yeah, we do have that Gallup polling about trust in media, and now, as in recent years, and let's be honest, Scott, a lot of this is driven by the rhetoric on your side of the aisle.
I mean, it's not. You think it's driven by the rhetoric and not the performance?
Absolutely. Okay. On the question of what is Trump's interest in this? That's one of the questions. Is it to have media that is in the middle, that is fair? Here is just a sampling of what has been happening at the White House as Trump has. He's entitled to do this, but invited very sycophantic media into the White House. Listen.
Why don't you wear a suit? And you refuse to wear a suit. Just want to see if do you own a suit?
Right. Will you guys also consider releasing the president's fitness plan? He actually looks healthier than ever before. Healthier than he did 8 years ago, and I'm sure everybody in this room could agree. Is he working out with Bobby Kennedy? And is he eating less McDonald's?
Photos have emerged of Senator Van Hollen sipping what appears to be margaritas with Abreu Garcia down in El Salvador. Do you encourage other Democrats to fly down to El Salvador to meet with this illegal alien who's an accused wife beater?
I like this guy. See, now this is the kind of a reporter we like.
And that last part is precisely the example of what I was talking about. That's the 3 moments CNN chose to stitch together to claim reporters were sycophantic, as if they were just forgetting the hundreds of highly tense verbal brawls that we've seen between Trump and the media in the entire last decade. Also, it's just plain false to suggest that podcasters or online media figures are all just lemmings that go in the same direction. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen some of the biggest names in the new media space like Candace Owens and Joe Rogan come out and criticize Donald Trump for things like cutting funding for Harvard or due process for Abreu Garcia. You don't have to agree with them to realize that they do break away from the mainstream when they want to, and the day they lose the authenticity is also the day they'll lose what made them appealing to the audience to begin with.
Trump is not interested in middle of the road Walter Cronkite reporting, and I think it's also completely ahistorical to describe Walter Cronkite as somebody who did not have a point of view, as he very famously did. But Trump is not interested in that, Scott. He's not.
Of course he's not. No, look, no politician, no president, Democrat or Republican, wants to be pilloried every day, and all of them believe they're being treated unfairly, and they all want to be treated better than they think they're being treated.
So is this about trust in media, or is it about bringing in more media that is favorable to him? I think that's the question.
But my point is this. Yes. If you're CBS or any other news outlet, the reason that you have lost trust ought to be obvious to you, and the way to fix it also ought to be obvious to you, and it has nothing to do with Donald Trump and everything to do with the product. Just try to make a better product that appeals to more people. And the way you appeal to more people is by not crapping on half or more than half of the country because of their values and political viewpoints.
I think that is a fair, just if we were sort of on another planet, out of context, it is a fair description of what is necessary in this moment. But I think in the context of this particular moment, where the pressure is coming from up high, the question is, what does the administration want? What would be the price that Sherry Redstone has to pay in order to get a yes on their deal?
There's no price you can pay. Look at what happened with Columbia. Look what happened to law firms. Look what happened with the AP. If you bend the knee, you get kneecapped. And I think to the point of the Associated Press, what should have happened is the rest of the press should have walked out. I was at an event at Columbia yesterday where the dean of the journalism school there asked that question of A.G. Sulzberger of the New York Times, and there was resistance to that idea. But as Jelani Cobb, the dean at Columbia, said, what you'd end up with in that press room then is, and these are my words, the freak show that Trump wants. Trump tries to devalue media. Why should we value his freak show there? Leave it to the freaks.
Wow, they really don't learn, do they? No wonder why so many Americans have just abandoned this old decaying media for something new. With polls suggesting nearly 60% of Americans who say they often get their news from online media. And the point here is not just that it's online, it's that it's decentralized citizen journalism that isn't beholden to large corporate interests. Because if it was just about being online, CNN's own $300 million venture with CNN Plus would not have failed so massively when they just churned out the same scripted and segmented shows, except with a subscription model that nobody asked for.
I would just say quickly here, if you look at the media landscape now, it is more democratized where people are getting and sourcing their information from. It does come from a lot of these non-traditional places. So if you're the White House and you want to communicate with at least a third of the country, and maybe they're watching Joe Rogan or someone else, I would argue it makes sense to have individuals representative from these spaces there.
But they're not freaks. I think calling them freaks.
I don't think there's any disagreement on that, by the way.
I mean, he called these new media sources the freak show. They're not freaks. They have audiences.
Some of them are.
They have audiences, and there's a reason that they're thriving is because people are starved for information that they think they can trust. They're not freaks. They're filling a need in this country, in my opinion.
Right.
Absolutely. And it's incredible that the legacy media only does more to shoot itself in the foot every time it tries to redeem itself. Imagine the kind of hubris and entitlement you must have to look down on the world of podcasters and influencers, even as they're beating the legacy media in every metric. The sooner they realize that, the sooner they'll be able to make amends. But tell me in the comments what you thought about this exchange, because I honestly see no sign of any introspection from the mainstream media as it spirals down to the abyss of irrelevance.